Okay, so this is 7.2, the second piece of it. And we started this the other day. And why is it that, like, if I, like, scroll one way, I'm using a Chromebook, and, like, I have to scroll the opposite way here, and it's confusing. Whoa. Is that bad? It's getting better, right? Yeah. Okay. There, I see it's better. This is 7.2. We started 7.2 last time. This is the end of it. We didn't get quite to the end. And I'm using a Chromebook here, so if I'm spelling things wrong or making mistakes, I'm going to blame it entirely on this. Okay, I can't remember if we did this yesterday or not. We did that question, right? And then I think I stopped here. Okay. When do you use arrays and when do you use array lists? What's just, like, without, like, reading further, like, what's your take on what you know so far?
Array lists are mutable. Array lists are mutable while arrays are not.
Okay. So array lists, you might not know the eventual length of what needs to be included, how many elements are going to be in the array list, but maybe we're using an array for other reasons as well. Let's explore this. It says use an array when you want to store several items of the same type and you know how many items will be in the array, or if you just want to limit it to a number. Like the number, like imagine we create an array for parking spots at AACS, right? Now, and we assign each person parking spots. That could work, right? You might use an array for that. But what if, like, we decide to add on to campus and just, like, add a lot of parking spots out where those trailers are out there, right, past the volleyball nets, and we create a whole new entrance to the school? Then we'd have to add more parking spots, right? And that might be a pain in the butt. So if anything you feel like has the future of expanding, think of, like, in APCSP, we're talking about, like, IPv4 versus IPv6 and how originally, like, we thought the internet would never expand to what it has or didn't take into consideration and it wasn't scalable. So scalability is important to think about when you're designing things. You know the array won't change in order or number. Use an array list when you want to store several items of the same type and you don't know how many items you'll need in the list, or when you want to remove items from the list and add. So which one's the safer bet, an array list or an array? Array list is, I guess, the safer, quote unquote, safer option to choose in some ways. It said here's a comparison of how to create arrays and array lists. So here's an array. Okay. We, in the comment, said arrays must specify a size, right? We said the high scores array, there was 5. And they were integers. And the names were strings. So let's say we know we only want the top 5 high scores. We don't want any more. And then it says array lists are empty to start with. We have high score list. I think I compared yesterday how, like, in Python, if you wanted to create a list, you would just say high score list assign and then square brackets, right? A lot easier, right? Maybe I was talking to my principal's class about that. So when you're first starting to write array lists, it might make sense to copy and paste them. And then eventually, like, just recognize you're getting the syntax right. It says here's a comparison to access and change elements in arrays and array lists. So these are just the comparisons. So we have like the dot length in an array. We talked about this, I believe, yesterday, the dot size method. And then in order to access, right, we would say dot get and then type the index number instead of this. So accessing different elements in an array is similar to Python, right? You don't have like this dot get here. And then modify, right? You can just reassign it, but here you'd say set. So this is an important chart, and we'll be looking back at this probably in the next iteration here of the last, I guess, programming challenge, just to make sure we're doing things correctly. But just something to note and look at. It says, note the array list methods add and remove do not have a simple equivalent in arrays because they change the number of elements in the list and may shift the positions of other elements. So add and remove aren't included in there because you can't really do that in an array. Here's a comparison handout. Cool, we'll skip that. Rewrite the following code that uses an array to use an array list instead. In the comments, write why you think an array list is a better data structure to use than an array for this problem. Okay, so the list, well, a to-do list as an array. We put 3 things in our list and it says do homework, help make dinner, and call grandma. Sounds like a good list of things to do. I need to call my grandma. And then to change, it says change element 1 to-do list. Let's say you're not going to help make dinner. You're just going to order pizza instead. That happens some nights in my house where we're like on the way home. We're like, what's for dinner? And we usually write a grocery list. I'll go to the grocery store on Sundays. We'll plan all the dinners for the week on Sunday. And then there's some days where we'll be like, we'll get home and we'll have 3 crazy kids running around. We're like, no, let's change the plan. So plans do change, and that's important when considering these things. So it says to-do list dot length, things to do. We printed them all out. And the first thing to do is index 0. So it says remove item 0 and move everything down. And then we basically assign index 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and 2 to blank. Here's the next thing to do. Okay, so rewrite this code to use an array list. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead here and put this into a multi-line comment here and take a look. So remember, if we wanted to create an array list, you scroll back up, right? Our array list looks like this. And I'm going to copy this. Control copy. And I'm going to move this down here. And I'm going to say Control V. I'm going to paste it. So my array list is not called nameless. This is called to-do list. Remember, I'm turning this array into an array list. So now I've created this blank list. And do we remember how to add items to my list? What method would I use? Dot add. Okay, so I'm going to add do homework. I'm then going to copy this and move to the next line. And to-do list, let's add help make dinner. And then we'll add one more. Call grandma. Call grandma. That's not spelled right. Okay. So went ahead, created an array list, and then added these items to my list. All right. Then it says I need to change element 1 to order pizza. So remember, we used the set, and it required us to take whatever the index was and pass that in first, and then the second would be whatever that value is. So I'm going to go ahead and use this. It's not list. This is to do list dot set. What's the index? The index is 1. And what am I putting in there? I'm putting in order pizza. Okay. And then it says I want to print out the length of the things to do. So I'll say system dot out dot print line. And if we look, it's not dot length. We would use whatever the list is dot size. So we would say to do list dot size plus things to do. Okay. And then we'd print out the next line below it here. And I'm just going to copy. Here's the first thing to do because I don't feel like typing it. And we're also going to have to change how we access. It says here's the first thing to do. To-do list. We wouldn't use this. What you would use instead is the get. So you would say whatever the list name is, which is to-do list, dot get, and then the index number. So we'll say to-do list dot get, and the index number that we're getting is 0. Okay. Then I'll comment out this, and well, that's all right. So it says remove item 0 and everything down. So remember, if we want to remove, we don't need all of this code for an array list. In order to remove, right, we said, if we look back to the methods, we had get and set, and we had the dot remove method that we used before. And remember, we would just remove whatever index that is. So dot remove, and inside parentheses, we put that index. So I'd say to-do list dot remove, and we're removing item 0. Okay, questions so far? What's up? Yes. All right. So this last line here says system.out.println. And I'm going to, I guess I could have just copied that, but I typed it out. Here's the next thing to do, and it would be to-do list dot get, and then the new item 0. Let's also answer this question down here. Why is an array list better than an array for a to-do list? An array list is better because I want to be simple and say it's easier to use. What's that?
Fewer code.
Okay, less code. So I'll just like put some bullet points. Okay, less code. You can change it. It's mutable, which means you can like add and remove items. Move beyond original length. There's many different things you can put, but for the sake of time, I think that's good enough. Let's run it. See if I forgot a semicolon somewhere, or maybe I made a mistake. Let's see. Passed. Okay. Took my time going through this. Tried to relate it back to yesterday as well, just to recall some things. We used the add method, the set method, the size method, the get method, the remove method. They had us use all of these. So 3 things to do. Here's the first thing to do. Do homework. Here's the next thing to do. Order pizza. I think my daughters would like this to-do list. They always come home every day, and the first thing they do when they get off the bus is they go in my classroom, my wife's classroom, and do their homework. I'd be surprised how much elementary school kids have homework. It's nuts. I feel like we never have time to do anything I want to do. They come home and they have math homework, which takes like 30 minutes. Then they have their spelling words. Remember when you used to have spelling tests? Right? So they have spelling. Then they had their memory verse. They practice their memory verse. And then they have to read. Each of them have to read for 20 minutes a night or for homework. So I have to like time them and sign off on it. They have their agenda book. You guys remember having agenda books or planners, right? I had to sign off on it every day. Yeah. Do you guys ever have to do that? Yeah. Brings back good memories. I called it agenda book. When I call an agenda book, they're like, it's called a planner. No one calls it agenda book. It was always my agenda book, right?
Like ever since I came here, everyone called it planners, but no, they were agenda books.
They were agenda books, right? And then she has a red folder that she brings home, and it has all of her papers from the week in it, and I can see all the great. And I gotta like see like this is you'll all get to relive this one day when you guys become parents, right? And you'll be like, you'll tell them, no, it's an agenda book, not a planner. I get made fun of every time I call it an agenda book. I think more high schoolers should have an agenda book. Anyway, things we talked about, completed, well done, summary, that's 7-2. Questions on array list methods? Are we good? Can we move on? We want to talk about loops. Who knows how far we'll get through here? I wish we had more time to get through all these things. Like I'd love to recap each lesson, do some other activities. It's just nonstop. Go, 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 go. Right, at a very fast pace. Some of you might not disagree and be like, Mr. Danz, I got this. This is not that fast, but to me, it seems like the fact that we have to basically talk through every single second of every single class and then still barely be on the right pace. I wonder if they just expect you to just like do all this on your own for homework and then just assign a massive amount. Who knows? Traversing array lists with loops. 7-3. It says array lists can be traversed with while loops and both regular and enhanced for loops for much the same way we use those constructs to loop over an array. Good news, right? Not a ton of differences, but let's just loop at it. This one says it's going to take 90 minutes, so we're definitely not getting all the way through this one. All right. Christina, is it an agenda book or a planner? Which one? It's a plan. Oh, man, we just had a debate. When I was a kid, it was always an agenda book. You had your parents sign your agenda book. Greg agrees.
Yeah, like, you're wrong. Ever since come here, you all call it planners, but as a kid.
Is that what they call it at the middle school, a planner?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. No, in elementary school, agenda books.
Agenda book. Even when I was in high school, the first day of school, they'd give you your, like, wasn't called a planner. Pretty sure it was called an agenda book. And I don't know. It was just like, and in it had like the student handbook, and you could like flip to the dates and could write in it. I think more people should have them. I think it helps. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, lots of homework for elementary school kids. Moving on. Enhanced for each loop. You can use an enhanced for loop to traverse all the items in an array list, just like you do with an array. When you only care about the values in the list and not their indices. Remember that when you use an enhanced for loop, you can't change those values, right? You can access, like multiply them by 2 and access them right then and there, but you're not actually like changing the values. An example is shown in the main method below. We'll take a look at that. So note, however, that you can't use the enhanced for loop if you want to add or remove elements while traversing an array list. Right. Okay. If an array list is modified, such as calling the add or remove methods while it's being looped over, it will cause the loop to throw a concurrent modification exception. If you need to modify an array list while looping over it, just use the regular while or for loops. So what does the code do? Guess before you run it. All right. Main method, array list. It's going to be full of integers. And my list is the name of it. And I'm going to add 50. Okay, so number 50 is in my list. And then 30. And then 20. And then it says I have a variable. It's an integer called total, which I'm sure is going to add up. So we'll say for each value in the integer, right, whatever that value is in my list, take that total that starts at 0 and add whatever value that is. So I'm just looking through this. Excuse me. If I'm just looking through this, I'm guessing it's going to add 50 plus 30 plus 20 to total. Okay. And then it says print sum of all elements. So here it says write a for each loop that computes the product. So I'm going to have to multiply things. Let's just run it as is and see if we were right with the total. It was 100. So let's write a for each loop. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm going to paste it. And for each value in my list, I'm going to multiply and then assign that value to the total. And it shouldn't be sum. This should be the product. Product is multiplication. Product of all elements. Okay, let's run it and see where we are at. Check this out. Total was already defined. So I got to get rid of this int in front of it, right? It's like, why are you redefining total again? Why don't you just assign total to 0? Now check this out. It says product of all elements is 0. Because what do we have? Total 0 times the value. 0 times the value is what? 0.
Yes.
So maybe I change total 0 to what number? 1. Let's change total to 1. Let's run it. Let's see where we're at. There we go. So we got 0 because 0 times anything is 0. Still trying to get some of my Algebra 2 students to understand that. Yeah. Not to throw shade on them, but we got to work on that. Okay. The for loop. It says you can also use a while loop or a regular for loop to process list elements accessed using an index. Array list indices start at 0, just like array indices. But instead of using the index operator, those square brackets to access, remember, we already talked about this in the last lesson, we need to use get, the get method. And make sure we're using the set to, like get and set, to deal with values and replacing indices and all that. If you try to use an index that is outside of the range of 0 to the number of elements -1 in an array list, your code will throw an index out of bounds exception. Okay. Similar to the array index out of bounds exception that we got when we were working with arrays. So the following code will throw an index out of bounds exception. Can you fix it? Of course we can. We have our main method. We have this list. It's going to be full of integers. It's called my list. And I'm adding 50, 30, and 20 to my list. So it should have a list of 3 values. It says int total 0. My for loop saying it says is less than or equal to the size. Okay, what can we change about this right here? So we're not going too far outside of our list.
Just set it less than.
Set it less than, right? Can try that. And there you go. So when we ran less than or equal to, we would have had an exception show up. So let me just show you. Less than or equal to. It's basically saying, hey, look, I looked inside your list and it didn't have that many values in it, right? You're telling me that index 3 exists, but it doesn't. I only have index 0, 1, and 2. So rather than it be less than or equal to, make it less than. Okay, one simple fix. Completed, well done. All right, a while loop. The example below demonstrates a while loop and an object-oriented approach where the list is a field of the current object and you use an instance method rather than a class or a static method to loop through the list. Let's take a look. Okay, so now we have this list called name list. We have this list worker. That's the name of the class. So this is my constructor, right? This is my class variable here. And we're taking whatever it's saying that this list that's being passed into list worker, being passed in this parameter, it's going to take the list. And then once it takes the list, there's also a method in here called remove name. And that's going to pass in a string. And let's see here. Boolean found is assigned to, I guess maybe I should read. The following code removes a name from the list. Set the found variable to the appropriate true or false values at line 13 and 20 to make the code work. Okay. It says, starting off here, is this true or false? So setting this, starting off the true or false.
This should be false in the beginning.
Okay, so originally, right, we want to set found to false. That's correct. And then as we loop through, right, we have our name list down here. As we loop through, it's less than the size, while the index is less than the size. We're going to go ahead and say, if name.equals is actually in the name list, we're going to remove it. Found would then go from false to true. Make sure to add the semicolon on the end. In order to keep if for some reason it wasn't in there in the first element, it would then add one to the index and move on. Okay. And then eventually return found. And found would be if it's false or true. So it would return if it is actually in there and set to true, it would return true. Let's run it. There you go. So what did all this do? Okay, so here's my main method, and I have a list called myList. I'm adding Amun, or like the N could be silent. Amu, don't know. Ethan, Donnie, and another Ethan. So I have two Ethans, a Donnie, and Amun. I then, right, create a instance of the class list worker. I then pass in, I passed in my list, right? And my list was what we created right there. So it passes in this list of 4 items. And then I print out whatever list worker name list does, and it prints out the names that I passed in there. Then I removed Ethan. Okay, so I use listworker.remove name Ethan. So I come up here, remove name, I passed in Ethan, and it looped through until it found Ethan. And once it found Ethan, if Ethan was actually in here, then it removed it and said, hey, by the way, I found it. Okay. It says, be careful when you remove items from a list as you loop through it. Notice how the method above only increments the index if an item was not removed from the list. This is because removing an item from a list will shift the remaining items to the left. And if you increment the index in all cases, you will skip the elements immediately after each element you remove. To see why, consider that those elements will be shifted into the position of the just removed element. And if you increment the index, it will move to the next position. Very good point. You don't want to skip that. Leaving the index unchanged after a remove allows the shifted down element to be processed on the next time through the loop as well. Basically saying you don't want to skip over certain items, which is important. I was watching this YouTube video the other day. It was really interesting, talking about how, what are they called? Solar flares? This is a bit off topic, but also sort of related here. Let me find it. It's talking about how there was this one, sometimes like for some transistors, bits can be flipped that aren't meant to be flipped due to radiation. And it was very interesting. I'll have to find it later and share it with you guys. Okay, it says, assume that nums has been created as an array list object, and it initially contains the following integer values: 0, 0, 4, 2, 5, 0, 3, 0. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 elements. What will nums contain as a result of executing numQuest? What is numQuest? It's below. Okay, I have a new list. It's called list 1. It says array list integer nums. And what we have here is, it says public void. No, I didn't miss something there. Public void numQuest. We have this variable. They named it K and assigned it 0. They also took an integer. They created an integer class here, and they said 0. While K is less than num size, if nums.get K equals 0, we're going to remove it. Okay. So let's look at this. So we went ahead and started here our values. It says the following integer values: 0, 0, 4, 2, 5, 0, 3, 0. And if K is less than num's size, looping through, so we'll get it. We will then remove whatever the 0 is, but then we add 1 to it. Okay, so I'm going to have to write through this, because if I don't write it down, my brain's not going to process it right. I'm going to get it wrong, most likely. So first, starting off, K is 0. Is 0 less than the size of the list? Yes. Okay. If K.get, so the first one would be 0, equals 0, remove that. So it will remove 0. Then moving on, it adds 1 to K. So now K is assigned 1. And it skips over this second 0 because now we're processing the 4. So it should read eventually 0, 4, 2, 5, 3. Maybe this? Let's try A. Correct. Okay, what's the reason why? Because why was this 1, 0 left there? And why was it not 4, 2, 5, 3? Because this should be written in an else, okay, in order to make sure that we're not skipping over an item. In the first example here, right? We passed in a 0. 0 was less than num size, okay? And then it said, if 0 is equal to 0, then remove it. And then we added 1 to k. But that means that now it's looking at, it removed this element right here. And after it removed that element, we already passed, we're looking at index 1, and index 1's here. We should have kept it at index 0, so that way this 0 was also processed and removed. But it was never processed because we skipped right to 4. 2 is not 0. 5 is not 0. 0 is 0, so it takes 0 out. And it was okay to then add 1 because then it looked at 3. Or sorry, because then it skipped over 3 and went right to this one, right? And then from there, we ended up removing that 0. If you had a 0 back to back, the second 0 would remain. And that's what happened there. Time does class end? 55. Oh, we still got time. Okay, it says the following has the correct code for the method getScore plus at least one extra unneeded code. Let's go ahead and look at this. So what do we want this to do? It says the following has the correct code. The method will calculate and return the score for a word game. The code should loop through all the elements in the word list. And if the length of the word is 3, it should add 1 to the score. Okay. If the length of the word is 4, it should add 2 to the score. If the length of the word is greater than 4, it should add 3 to the score. Is that like, what's that with Scrabble? Is that like how that works? The method should return the score. Okay. So first, let's look through what we got here. Let's say public static int get score. And then we will end it as well. We'll end this method. So the get score method, we opened it, we passed in a word list. We don't know what's inside the word list, but we'll originally start off and we'll say the score is going to be 0. And we opened a for loop. So then let's also close our for loop. That sound good? All right, so if the word length is 3, if word dot length, which one should we use? Should we use 2 or should we use 6? We should use 2. Okay. If word dot length is 3, then we're going to add 1 to it, right? And then else if it's equal to 4, we're going to add 2 to it. And then if it's greater than 4, we're going to add 3. Okay. So that's what that looks like there. See if I made any mistakes. So look, check this out. The dot length is what we use for arrays, right? Or is it this all needs to be indented? Is that what's one?
I think we used the wrong.
No, you use the other one.
Yeah.
Or then so you gotta like.
Yeah, but I was wondering too, it changed my indentation here. Okay. So dot length is what we use for an array, right? The dot length method is what we would use to look at right there. Okay. No, sorry, here. Sorry, the indentation was kind of wonky there too. The dot length method is what we would use while looking at the string word. Okay. The reason why we wouldn't use dot length here is that this is what we would use for an array. So if dot length with parentheses, easy fix, done. Okay, so that is what my code should look like. I'm not sure if I had made that indentation mistake originally, but I didn't mean to. The following has the correct code for a method called insert in order, plus at least one extra unneeded code statement. This method should add the pass name in alphabetical order to a private list field called namelist. Okay. So let's open up our method and let's close the method like that to start. And then let's see what else we have here. We're starting off, our index is going to start off, we'll set it to 0. And then we'll say while we'll also close our while we're at it. You don't have to go in this order. I always like opening and closing them just so that way I don't end up messing it up later. Okay, so we're taking whatever gets passed in here. It says nameless.getIndex compare to whatever the name is if it's less than 0. Remember, the compare to would be if it's less than 0, you get a negative value. Okay, so from that, we're going to go ahead and add. Remember, the add allows me to take, sorry, I need to scroll down here. Okay, we take the name, we add it, but then we're also moving the index by 1. And what's wrong with this? That when we take the add, right, we need to make sure we're using the index here. So we used add when we only had one argument being passed in. But if you are putting it at a certain index, you cannot do that. So we're going to use the other one instead. I'm going to drag this out.
That's to like move it to the left.
Ending my while loop. I'm sorry. And then at the end, no, I'm not moving anything to the left. It's just I'm ending my while loop right here. Well, no, moving the index up by 1. There's that. add index. It's saying highlighted blocks are wrong or in the wrong order.
I put the name list like right above the end method.
Name list above what?
The end method. Like seconds of that.
The end method. You put it there.
Yeah. That's what it said was, right? And then I like ended
All right, let me wrap my head around this and look at it. It only took you 5 times to solve this one. Nameless.add. Maybe I'm just not thinking this is, maybe I'm trying to solve a problem that's not the right thing I'm trying to solve. Insert in order. I'm adding at the very end to the index name. Let me read and see what the problem originally wanted. I think I read this wrong in my head. This method should add the pass name in alphabetical order to the private list called name list. Oh, I see. Looking in here. Well, no. I'm not sure I'm grasping this properly. I'm not sure I really understood what it wanted from the get-go. This method should add the pass name in alphabetical order to a private list field called name list. So I had insert in order, a name was passed in, set the index to 0. As long as 0 is less than whatever nameless.size is, and it's less than 0, add 1 to the index. Gotcha. And at the very end, because once it finds, okay, so this is the condition. The while is what's throwing me off here originally. So I didn't read through this thorough enough here. That's why I end up getting it wrong. I didn't read through this. So if I have the index, it's less than whatever the size of the name list is. And also, we want to make sure when it's compared to the name, it's less than 0. We're adding 1 to it. But when we break out of that loop, then this array list, name list, we're adding on the index and name only once we've broken out of that. Okay. I made the mistake and read it wrong and thought we were doing something entirely different. Okay. So don't do what I did. Make sure to read everything thoroughly. Sometimes I don't always do that. Let me see what this is. All right. It says you can put any kind of object into an array list. For example, here's an array list of students. Although the print statement works here, you may want a nicer printout. It says add a for each loop that prints out each student and then a new line. Okay, so let's see what we have. We have this main method. We have an array list, and we have this array list called roster. And we added Skylar, we added Ayana. It says replace this with a for each loop that prints out each student on a separate line. Okay, so originally, if I were just to print this out, okay, it doesn't actually print it on a separate line. So what we need to do is write a for each loop. So I will comment that out. and I'll say for, and what are we passing? We'll say for string we'll go, because we have to pass in, it looks like in here, I have my toString method down here. I have my student name, email, ID passed in. When we call that method, that should print out. So place this with a for each loop, prints out each student on a separate line. Add a for each loop. So I want to print out roster element 1, and I want to print out roster element 2. But also in using the student class, we need to use in this, we need to use the toString method in printing that out. Okay. So if I were to let's see if I can start this properly. Maybe I add a for we're looking at here, and then we're going to have to call our student list. So how would I end up writing it to call, making sure I'm pulling the items from my toString? How would I do that? What's that?
You do system.out.println, and then you the student. With that, it could be with it. It can be a string value because you have int values as well in the student.
Right.
So for our return map type, we have to set it to the student return type.
Okay. So set it to the student return type.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if we look in this, check this out. Down below here, when we had public student, right, we wanted to make sure that when this was passed in originally, we're passing the name, we're passing the email, we're passing the ID, and this was then stored in these variables up here. So for that, instead of string, you're saying as well to add the student return type.
Right.
So when you go through here, now it'd be as simple as saying system.out.println, and then if we're then returning the student in there, that would then help, I almost said revoke, invoke the toString method that we had down there. So we now were able to print out, checking that code contains a loop. Oh, there we go. True. It said false at first. I was like, wait, what? So knowing that, even though this is only replacing, like, it probably would be easier and probably do it in less lines of code. If you're only having like looping through a list of 2 elements, you're probably not going to use a for loop. But this was a list of, hundreds of elements. Let's say for every single student at AACS, and this might make more sense. So once again here, if you're using the string, like you type right here, and you type in string student, you're using more than just a string. The student is not the string. It's going to not utilize this toString method that we, sorry, it's compiling. I want to show the error. It's not using the toString method that we originally were wanting to use. And the error, it says, is incompatible types. Student cannot be converted to string. It's because we don't want to convert student to string. We want to leave it as student. Okay? So the type is the student, the class that we already created here. And then by running it, we're able to get what we wanted. Slowly but surely. Okay, so going back up to this, right? What do we replace? We replace system.out.println roster with for student. We used an enhanced for loop and it went through the roster and then printed out those two elements. So it printed out Skylar and Ayana. All right, it is 50, so I don't want to get into this and then be limited for time. Looks like there's still a decent amount. So we will stop here and we'll pick up on this on Thursday at 7:35.